Okay, hello, welcome, week 9, final week of this 9-week course that I was able to somehow put into action. So nothing really new to teach today, but the final piece is just integration, of just briefly recapping, how we've explored meditation step by step over the past 8 weeks. Not to become different people. We haven't, changed that much externally in any way, shape, or form. But it's the ability to see our experiences, whether they are a physical experience, a mental experience, or an emotional experience, to see these experiences with a bit more clarity. That's been the whole point of our practice. So just briefly, weeks 1 and 2, we focused on finding our sense of awareness around our breath, being able to return to breath time and time again, almost being able to find a sense of safety within the breath. And the reason's simple is many of us, we don't have a conscious relationship to our breathing. And the only time we become aware of our breath is during moments of extreme emotional states. Anger, panic, anxiety, stress, depression, sadness, all of these kind of things that come to the surface. And the challenge of noticing your breath at that point in time is that you have no idea of how to work with your breath. And so this breath just comes right up to the surface, feels like a tidal wave washing over you in terms of the emotion, and we get lost in it all. We start to drown in our emotions. We start to become overwhelmed by this breath that we cannot control. So building this foundation in awareness of breathing, week 3 brought us into the body a bit more. So we had an embodied experience, a more realized inner body experience as we went through a body scan. So a body scan becomes a great tool to use, whether we use the tool in its entirety of sweeping head to toe, toe to head, or whether we need the body scan for just a particular part of the body. So in the sense of having something like anger come up. For some of us, anger surfaces with additional sensations as well. Common sensation of anger is something like heat. Heat builds up in the body. For some of us, that heat is felt in the ears, for some of us in the hands, for some of us in the chest. For something like panic or sadness, there could be a sense of heaviness or tightness around the chest. And so body scanning in that sense, or just bringing awareness to the body, can help us start to feel an emotion as it's starting to enter the body. And the hope being is that if we can notice these things as they come up, we can create a bit of space before we end up becoming overwhelmed by them. So before that point of overwhelming or feeling overwhelmed, we notice what is happening, the breath, the tool of awareness that we possess, the mind that we're trying to cultivate is able to create space for that emotion to surface or for the sensation to surface, but it doesn't tip the scale to the point where we become overwhelmed or consumed by the emotion. Week 4 is where we introduced Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations. So we added a sense of tonality to our feeling so that we could build a bit more of an insightful relationship to what we feel. So it's not that, we have to get caught up in our pleasant or unpleasant feelings, but we can acknowledge them. That Vedana ultimately leads us to, the things that we learned last week, that nothing lasts forever. It is impermanent in nature. No matter how good of a feeling it is, no matter how bad of a feeling it is, nothing lasts forever. But Vedana at least lets us understand that, while I'm sitting to meditate, I feel some form of ache in my shoulder. We'll just use that as the example. Instead of getting overwhelmed or fully, drawn into the feeling of what is happening in the shoulder, you acknowledge it, you notice it. Unpleasant ache in my left shoulder. Fact is fact. We don't have to turn it into fiction. We don't have to get consumed by it, but by noticing it, labeling it, and just identifying it, we've created a little bit of space. That little bit of space may be enough for this unpleasant sensation to not start to tip the scale, to start asking for more and more of your energy. And the hope being is that by doing those simple steps, creating that little bit of space, we can come back to ourselves in this moment where everything is okay. Week 5 brought us into identifying our state of mind. And the state of mind can change. Could change from day to day, could change from morning, afternoon, and evening, could change just due to the environment of what's happening internally or externally around us. But this mind state, if we can recognize it, can help us understand that no two meditations will ever be alike. How you are working within your mental environment, though, will help to shape how you approach your meditation. Understanding that, there is no perfect meditation, you can still make the most of a meditation even if you have a restless mind. Even if you are sitting while you're angry in your mind. Even if you're very drowsy in the mind. The outcome of your meditation may be slightly different. So if you've started your meditation with a mind that is very restless, the outcome may be that if you work skillfully with your meditation, the state of mind that you're dealing with can calm down a bit. So less restlessness is there. The restlessness may fluctuate throughout the practice, but if we can acknowledge that the mind is restless, then we don't have to force the mind to not be restless. It will just happen on its own. But if we are noticing that the mind is restless and we are agitated at the restless mind, you are only creating more restlessness in the mind. Does that make sense? Same thing with something like being angry. It's one thing to be angry, it's another thing to get angry at your anger. So then you end up rolling in your misery. It is another thing to feel, it is one thing to be sad. It's another thing to be sad about feeling sad or to further add on to sadness. So oftentimes we don't even allow ourselves to feel the emotion. We end up doubling down on it, which further creates more misery in terms of that emotion. So all we're looking to do is once again notice. If the mind is restless, if the mind is agitated, if the mind is drowsy, we don't need to add more judgment, more tension onto it. Just acknowledging it is enough to start to create a little bit of space. Week 6, we then started to look at some of the factors that help to support our practices. And they do naturally come to the surface as we get deeper and deeper in our meditation practice. And even, let's just talk about touching back on week 5. You might find that at the start of your practice, your energy is a bit restless. Could just be natural. You've had a busy day. All that busyness is going to sit with you at the start. But if we work skillfully with staying with our breath, staying grounded in our body, working with the feelings as they come and go. Once again, not getting caught up in anything, just noticing. That the restless energy that may have begun through the meditation practice can be washed over with a bit of calmness. And then we can give more energy to that calm state of mind. And if we can give more energy to the calm state of mind that starts to surface from the practice, naturally, once again, that restless state of mind can take a seat in the back, or it can just subside slowly and completely. And so, we have the mind states that are not as conducive to the practice, the distracted mind, the wandering mind, the restless mind. Maybe I already said that, I don't remember. But then the factors that support us are usually the opposite of it. And if we can spend more of our energy cultivating the positive aspects of it, not worrying about necessarily quelling down or shutting down the negative aspects. If we can spend more time in the positive, the negative in this sense naturally falls off. And so we end up resting in a place which is mindfulness, which is us being aware of our experience, grounded in our experience, curious of our experience. And spending more time there is naturally going to be more beneficial for us. Week 7 for some of us was an interesting week because we centered away from the mind and towards the heart. So we brought a more heart-centered practice of loving kindness. The idea being is that we're not expected to go and love everyone. That's not the point. But even just a little bit of kindness goes a long way. And this is not just sending out love and compassion and kindness for those that are suffering, but also for those that create suffering. Hard part to extend to. You know, you don't have to go to the nth degree to, wish them supreme happiness and all of that, but just understanding that little bit, that there are people that suffer and there are people that cause suffering. But even the people that are causing suffering are suffering themselves. And you're not the one that is there to eradicate their suffering. Everybody has to do it on their own. But what loving kindness asks you to do is honor the humanity of each human being, as a sentient being, as a living being. That there is more that ultimately connects strangers than divides us. Division is naturally a process of the mind, but unity comes from a more heart-centered place. And whether or not that person is able to receive your loving kindness or not, that's not the intention. It is just simply to give without expectation of receiving. Hard to do, especially when there's disagreement amongst people. We don't have to get into all the details of politics and all of that exists in this turbulent time. But loving kindness is about having kindness towards an experience towards another entity. And then week 8, last week, we were able to dive into seeing the change with a bit more clarity. We had built a very strong foundation from weeks 1 through 7. And week 8 just allowed us to see a bit more what was already there. That the 3 tenets that we were working with, anicca, anatta, and dukkha, how everything is always changing, how experience in itself is not something we have to take personally, and sometimes the holding on to an experience is what creates our suffering. So in just some of the most common examples that we used from last week's meditation practice, we were noticing the rising and falling of our breath. It came, it went. It arrived, it left. We received, we released. It is this constant ebb and flow of breath coming in, breath going out. It is an impermanent feature of working with the breath. It is not ours to hold on to. It is not a permanent thing that exists. It is something that constantly is there with us, but we have no ownership of it. The anatta component of it, the being, just having that little bit of distance around our breathing. In the simplest way, as much as we are the ones breathing, the breath simply enters and it exits. We create space for the breath to enter. We allow the breath to release. If we sit with poor posture, less breath enters, more breath gets held in. But if we can just be spacious in our body, in that simplest sense, the breath enters, the breath goes. We are just holding space there. We are creating space. And then the abstract way of working with the idea of suffering around breathing is for you to take a breath in and then to not let it go, to hold it. How long can you possibly hold that breath before you start to suffer knowingly? You have no choice but to release and let go. And that is just an extension of things that we do to ourselves. There are experiences that we go through that we hold on to so tightly that at a certain point, by holding on for so long, so tightly, we stop letting the experience itself breathe. And we have to learn to relax our grip a little bit, to let things go, so that the experience can move, because all experiences are moving. So all of these experiences, all of these practices from weeks 1 through 8, they allowed us to meet experience with awareness instead of blind habit. Because a lot of times when we experience something, we bring up the example once again of the 14-year-old toothless chihuahua. The experience of just simply seeing this friendly dog. But human being may have had a traumatic experience with a dog in early childhood. So all future dogs have been painted in a negative light. Despite the fact that this dog has no teeth. No bite can happen, no injury can occur, but there's a very small thought in the back of their head that echoes back to an experience that may have happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that shapes how all future experiences are received. And what awareness allows us to do, what mindfulness allows us to do, is press pause. The stimulus entered, in this case, the dog is seen, and very quickly, seeing this dog brings this human being back to this traumatic experience of childhood. No space was created. And what mindfulness allows us to do is to create a little bit of space between the initial sensation of seeing, in this case, that sensation is received by the eyes, and the reaction to the experience. And that little bit of space, whether it's your breath, whether it's just grounding in the body, can allow you to see the current experience with a bit more clarity. That this little toothless chihuahua isn't the German Shepherd that bit you when you were a child. Because rightfully so, that created trauma. We're not denying it, we're not ignoring its existence, but we're understanding that this is not that. It's similar. All dogs could be similar at that point. Doesn't matter how big or small, how fluffy or anything like that. It can be a very similar experience, but it is not exactly that experience. Even to the same degree, German Shepherd bit you when you were a child, you see a German Shepherd now. A little bit more reaction can get sparked, because it is a very similar dog. But maybe that was a very poorly trained dog. Maybe the part of the experience you don't remember is that you accidentally stepped on the dog's foot. Right? Because you don't remember all of the experience, you remember the one thing that defined the experience, that you were harmed. But in this sense, maybe it's a very well-trained German Shepherd, a very friendly dog who wouldn't hurt a baby. And so once again, we can take a moment to press pause to notice the experience that is directly in front of us, working only with the facts, adding no layer of fiction. Does that make sense? So then in that sense, what the hope has been is that we can learn over the last 8, now week 9, what meditation has really tried to train us to do. And it hasn't really tried to help us empty the mind. It's not about stopping the mind. The mind is always going to be moving. It's always going to be receiving information. As long as your eyes are open, you are receiving information. And everything that you see is then processed by the brain. Everything processed by the brain is then felt within the body. Most of it is just underneath the surface of our awareness because it doesn't pose an existential threat. It doesn't really spark us in the way that is very stimulating, but it is processed. And it's not about meditating to escape from life. We're not trying to escape from our stresses, our anxieties, or anything of the sort. It is not a tool that we use to escape, to run away. And as we've noticed, as much as relaxation can be found, a state of calmness can be found, it is not entirely that either. We train 3 fundamental qualities when we sit to meditate. One is to be mindfully aware, to notice what is happening. To not have that awareness border a sense of paranoia where you're hyper aware of everything and blindly reacting to everything, but you're acknowledging, you're noticing, you're acknowledging, you're accepting. And that last part, acceptance, is a very hard part. When I teach my deep stretch classes, I joke, but the joke lands because it's true. When there's a deep stretch happening in the body, you'll notice what you're feeling. You can acknowledge it. On a scale of 1 to 10, this feels like a 7, could feel like an 8. You know, if we're stretching the hamstring, you can acknowledge where around the hamstring you feel. But there is this little thought that's like, but it'll get better, right? And until you're able to address that thought, you haven't accepted the experience for what it is. And it could be the smallest little thought in the back of your head, but then it starts to get given some fuel. It's got to get better. You know, I've been in this stretch for 2 minutes. Nothing's changing. It's got to get better. And then once again, you're doing what I've said. You're adding tension onto tension. And until you can accept, which is a form of surrender, that this is the experience. I'm not worried if it gets better or if it trends worse. I'm just going to notice the experience for what it is. I'm not hyper aware of it. I'm not going to fixate all of my energy onto it. I'm just going to acknowledge it, but I'm going to come back to my practice. When we think about not itching an itch, the itch gets stronger. But what we're doing when we sit to meditate is focusing on breath. Not focusing on not itching the itch, it's focusing on breath. We can't do both at the same time. You can't focus on breath and be like, okay, I'm not going to itch. Focus on breath, not going to itch. You acknowledge that the itch is there, or you acknowledge that the ache is there. But we can't constantly keep fluttering from one to the next, one to the other, because the brain is then starting to speed up. It goes from breath to ache, from ache to breath, breath to ache. And that's causing more turbulence in the mind. The breath is what creates a steady mind, calm mind. So awareness, and I guess just in that form, stability. Stabilizing mind onto breath. As much as our body tends to get relaxed, soft, it's very easy that the mind drifts down there. And when the mind drifts into a body that is very relaxed, especially if we hold a lot of tension, the joke is made, what starts off as a meditation turns into a napitation, turns into a snoritation. And what we want to do is remain alert. Remaining alert and attentive mentally. And it may happen that, as the breath gets softer, slower, calmer, that we do start to have to require more sharpness from the mind. It would be one thing if I were to ask you to try to meditate by taking the biggest and deepest breath that you could. But doing so ends up only working at the surface of our body. We're grounded in the body, but it's a very different breath than what your very natural breath is, like the breath that you wake up with first thing in the morning. And so the hope is with meditation, it was one of the questions that was asked on the weekend, how do I breathe? Is there a special way to breathe? Answer is no. You work with your breath as it is. You're working with the truth of your breath as it is. So we do not need to artificially enhance our breathing. The only time I would recommend that is if you start to feel that the mind is getting drowsy or if you're losing connection to breath. In which case, to stabilize your mind back onto your breath, maybe just a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many, just some deeper breaths, some stronger breaths to reestablish that connection to breathing, and then let it soften, let it slow down, let it calm down. Because when we can get to a breath that is that subtle, that calm, we start to notice a lot more of what is happening. The more still we become, the more quiet we become, the more we can feel, the more we can start to listen to. Whether it's the listening of feelings, listening of thoughts, listening of sensations, we can start to feel more and hear more, but we need to quiet down and find that sense of stillness on our breath. And the last step of it all is becoming wise to the experience. There is every possibility that we can rewrite past experience when we start to see things with a bit more clarity. Understanding that so much of our experience is filtered from past experiences. So we always have this, conditioned response. We have a conditioned habit. When we sit to meditate and we notice things surface, physical, mental, emotional, from that place of awareness and working with a stable mind, a mind that doesn't get caught up or runs away, nothing like that, we can start to see what is in front of us with that clarity. And by seeing experience with clarity, that person that was bit by a German Shepherd sees a German Shepherd now, but understands that this German Shepherd isn't here to harm me. So he can go out and maybe extend his hand to touch this dog. A dog that he's been deathly afraid of for 10 years, 20 years, however many years. But it requires a mind that is, one, aware of what it sees in front of it, is stable enough that it's not like this approaching the dog because it's all just full of fear. But it can take a few breaths, create some space to acknowledge that, this dog appears to be kind. It appears to be friendly. And maybe back when I was a child, I may have stepped on a dog, which caused the dog to protect itself and bite me out of defense instead of out of aggression. But who knows, whatever that experience was. But wisdom is that ultimate last step to take, to extend the hand to the dog. If it bites, then you know that you can always pull your hand away, but maybe it won't this time. So these three qualities, the ability to strengthen our awareness, to strengthen our sense of stability, and to enhance our sense of wisdom, they grow with our practice. As we work through what comes up time and time again when we sit to meditate, whether it's the achy body, the restless mind, whatever it may be, the more we can stay with these things and work with them, the more aware we become of ourselves in the moment, the more we're able to practice remaining still and stable throughout the experience of what we are feeling physically, mentally, emotionally. And as a result of that, we learn more about ourselves. So we become more wise to our experience. So then what this leaves you with is how you can develop a sustainable meditation practice. Once again, when we sit here to meditate as a group, typically meditations have ranged from 20 minutes to maybe 30 minutes, but then still on the lower end, sometimes 15 minutes. And there is usually a very genuine worry, once this environment leaves, even though some of you are probably going to be back here at the end of the month, even just that 2-week window, 3-week window, how do I maintain my practice? And the hope is you can keep it as simple as it can be for you. So if that is, whatever that minimum threshold is, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, that's a good enough place to start. If you can find time for more, it's never a bad thing. If you lose time one day, nothing to be stressed about. If you forget to meditate one day, nothing to be stressed about. You don't need to beat yourself up over an inconsistent meditation practice. But the hope would be is that you've been able to find some sense of value in the practice over the last 8 weeks. From the foundation that you've built and what you've experienced physically, mentally, and emotionally from a practice like this, you have felt the value of the practice yourself. Not from what I've said, not from my own personal experience, but from you doing it yourself. So you have experienced the truth of what a meditation practice can provide you. And if that much is true, then naturally you can find the time to integrate 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, however many times works for you. And the practice has always been simple. 2 building blocks that we work with, sitting and breathing. Comfort matters. We're not trying to meditate in a way that generates discomfort, although we can't control if discomfort comes up. We can work with it, but we may not be able to stop it from coming. So as we always do, it's just a sense of arriving. You know, ideally, you're not so busy that you're like sprinting to sit down kind of deal, but you can have a gradual slowdown. You can still meditate with the busiest of minds, but once again, it's just going to feel like a different meditation. It's like you watching highway traffic with a busy mind versus you watching a country road with a calm mind. Car still occasionally comes, even on a country road, one lane road. But it's one thing to deal with the turbulence of the occasional car coming by on a single road versus all the highway traffic with horns and cars and all that. Both can exist, but one is naturally more conducive to our experience than the other. So we arrive. We arrive physically, we arrive mentally, we arrive emotionally. Arriving allows us to settle. So we notice what's happening. You know, how is it that we feel physically, mentally, emotionally? For some of us, that stage of arriving and settling is a simple process. We're able to understand that the moment my butt hits the cushion, I'm here to meditate. But naturally, you've had a busy day. It's going to take maybe a couple of minutes for the busyness of your day to subside. For you to at least accept that, you know, okay, I've had a very busy day, but for the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I'm allowing myself to slow down. You have to give yourself permission to do that. Sometimes it's very hard. You get caught up in the busyness of your day. You're like, I'll find 5 minutes later. I can't afford 5 minutes right now. But once again, we have to value how much space can be created in 5 minutes. And if we can do that, then the 5 minutes is worth spending. So we arrive, we settle, we feel. We feel what it is that we're working with. We're noticing, we're feeling. So if we carry tension in the body or if we're feeling a certain sort of way, mentally or physically, we acknowledge that this may come up in the practice. But noticing it and acknowledging it will allow us to accept it when and if it starts to come up in the practice. So breath hasn't even been focused on yet. The breath will come, but we want to create the best environment for our practice to happen. The best mindset to have, the best setting to have. So then we notice the body, we feel the body, and we notice the mind, we feel the mind. We just take inventory of all that we're working with. And having done that, once again, this may be half the practice in a busy day. Here we have the natural slowing down. We walk into this room, we sit on our mats, and we just settle into the body for a bit, and then eventually we end up meditating. So some of that restless energy just gets released from being still, from being soft, from being relaxed. But once you start to focus on your breath, that still exists. You're still noticing what's happening in the body. You're still noticing what's happening in the mind. But at that point in time, you're remaining with your breath. The anchor is there. The anchor starts to get established. It's just that simple reassurance that when you slip away from your breath doesn't disappear. Your mind just decides to look elsewhere. And all you're looking to do or all you're trying to do is bring your mind back onto breath. The breath is always there to come back to. You don't have to look hard to find it. It just requires you to have the willpower to want to come back to the breath. And every so often, there will be some thought that takes hold, that rises up, that really demands your attention. Whether you've consciously sat with the thought or whether you've been unconsciously swept away by the thought. I think I've mentioned this in the past. You know, if such a thought comes up or such a feeling comes up, there's every possibility. I would avoid doing it on your phone because that can just lead into another round of distractions. But, you know, have your notepad, have some sticky note in which you can just write down, whether it's a simple jot note, simple 2-3 words of what that thought is, what that feeling is. And if it is truly important to you, address it at the end of your practice. Because at the end of your practice, the mind will be ready to receive that thought, receive that emotion. But in the midst of your meditation, there's always this turbulence of being with the thought, but reminding yourself to come back to the breath. Going back to the thought, going back to the breath. And it's once again, you're just bouncing, which creates turbulence within the practice. And so that lasts the whole practice, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Some days it may just be your body scan. Maybe you do have or have had a really busy day. Instead of trying to spend more time with breathing, the breath is still there. Once again, doesn't disappear, it's still there. But you may just take a few moments, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, to just be with your body, to allow your body to soften, to allow the tension that you carry through your shoulders and hips to settle. If you're having a very busy day mentally, you might choose to then just, observe the state of mind. It may be that being with your breath is just very hard to do because you're just very caught up in the mind. But we can just notice what's happening up here, not trying to change anything, but just noticing what's happening up here. There are different ways that we can use this tool of meditation to create space. But the main tool that we're using, or the main process that we're following to create space, is to notice what's already happening. And that is the main thing. When we are mindless, opposite of mindful, things are happening and we are unaware of them happening. It's like we're on autopilot. It is a very anxiety-inducing experience to be mindful of driving because you've realized just how much else is on the road. It's a very chaotic experience. But we don't give it any second thought. We get into the car, and because it's become so second nature, we just drive. We're driving 100 down the highway, 120. At this point in time, it's become so common. You'll see that car that's going at 150, and you're like, oh, there they come, there they go. I hope they get to where they're going to. It's like crazy. Big trucks, little cars, all sorts of things. And the autopilot experience in that sense allows us to just kind of, take a step back from the experience. But to be very mindful of the experience is a very anxiety-inducing experience because you notice all of these things outside of your control moving around you. I just find it a very humorous thing to do occasionally, but yeah, you just drive in the very right lane because that way it's the least amount of anxiety there. Yes?
About the environment. So if you have any opinions on darkness versus light and music versus silence and smells, so like an incense or a candle, do you have any opinions?
You'll remember my answer. This was mentioned. Yeah. So the question was around, what I like to call training wheels, or just tools that help. Like they are there. Apparently, sometimes I've heard monks will burn a stick of incense, and the longer sticks of incense, they last could be anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. So they're not using like an app that says, here's the timer, 45 minutes are up. But for them, the grounding smell calms you down, especially if you pick a nice scent. And for them, it would be like, okay, when the smell of incense is no longer there, 45 minutes is probably up. So that would be the end of their meditation practice. I have a lady that I've worked with that she asked me the same thing. She goes, my husband and I, we were walking through Arundel Park. And we sat by the river, and the meditation felt so serene. And I've had a lot of difficulty at home at night meditating because my mind is very, moving. But I found that I put on in the background the sound of running water, and my meditation felt effortless. Is that wrong? Absolutely not. It is a tool that's there. Nature is something that we are directly in tune with. My only advice was for her, it's like, okay, so, occasionally and no problem. Say you meditate for 30 minutes. Some days you're going to need 30 minutes of water sound. Occasionally you might try 15 minutes of water, and then having that understanding that you've created the foundation that the next 15 minutes you can do on your own. So the training wheels are always there. The stick of incense allows for a very grounding scent to come in. It'd be much different to go meditate next to a garbage dump. The possibility is there. The possibility is there to meditate next to a construction site. The possibility is there to meditate in public. The possibility is there to meditate in the hardest environment possible, but it's not practical always. So we use these tools whenever it's needed. We just try our best to understand that everything in terms of the calming effect, the grounding effect, the slowing down effect that these training tools provide, there is every possibility that those effects can be created internally as well. And so we also understand, though, we are not monks. We are not monastics. We have a lot of stuff on our plate, physical, mental, emotional. So these tools serve the purpose for you to get into your state of meditation. It's like the most basic way. They say that the best posture for meditation is the lotus, which is shin, which is here. For some of us, no problem sitting here. For some of us, we're going to hear sounds and pops and all sorts of sounds that come through the body here. And for others, we get here and we can't get out of here, right? So it's all about creating the most conducive environment for you. I guess the last point you had mentioned was about darkness and light. My preference would be a darker environment. I've gone to the extremes of sometimes meditating in a closet, which has no sound, which buffers, and which has complete darkness. Once again, it's not a bad thing if it happens, but it's just about how much energy you give to it. Sometimes when we meditate in a light environment with brightness, we start to see things. Oh, I see colors, I see this, I see that, and we naturally associate those colors with like a pleasant experience. But we can't give it too much credence, because what if that color doesn't show up the next time you sit to meditate? Is it a bad meditation? Probably not. So I also just find that gives less stimulation. So the more grounded we can be, the quieter the environment can be, the calmer the environment can be, the more still the environment can be, the better it is naturally for your practice. But you can't turn off the sun if you're sitting outside to meditate. The sounds of the bird are quite pleasant, unless it's a seagull nonstop yapping, in which case it may not be. Everything is it depends, I would say. But that is a great question. It's a very common question. One thing we didn't get to do this time around, and it's unfortunate that it was only the very final week that the weather is this well, but one of the things that we'll try to explore in next set of spring sessions is an outdoor meditation. Just so that you can understand what the difference is. It is a very different meditation than what we do here, because there's a lot more stimulation out there. Not all of it's helpful. Some of it is. Like I said, the sound of birds can be very calming for us. But if you start to hear a lot of seagulls, it's not always the nicest sound. Every so often, the sun, which starts to feel nice and pleasant, warm, may start to overheat you. So there's all of these factors that exist outside that with a very strong mind you can maybe differentiate. The main thing that we have trouble with outside when it comes to meditating is actually feeling our breath, because air is all around you. So here in this room, it's relatively still. There's no fan on, none of the vents are working. So the air that you breathe, you can feel. You can feel as you take in the air, you can feel as you release the air. When we go outside and there's a breezy day, it becomes a little bit harder because you can't create a subtle breath to feel the breath entering and exiting. So these are like the slight differentiations of meditating indoors and outdoors. As much as we've been talking about the meditation practice and how to develop that, the flip side is the mindfulness component, is how you then take what you've created in your seated meditations and apply them to your daily life. In the most basic way of taking one breath before you do something that is good or bad, or just a next step. Before you open a door, take a breath. Before you pick up a phone, take a breath. Before you eat a meal, take a mindful breath. Just that little bit of space. One breath doesn't feel like a lot, but when we are in our meditation practice, we can understand the value that even one breath can hold. because it allows us to start again. And in that sense, we're busy, 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 busy. We understand how busy we are, so we press pause. We take one mindful breath, one full present inhale and exhale. Chronologically speaking, maybe only a couple of seconds have passed. But internally, that one breath can create a huge amount of space. And that is what we try to do. We're creating space. Whether it's in the physical meditation as we sit and breathe, or whether it's out as we are living mindfully with our lives. Living life from a place of spaciousness, not from a place of being smothered by our experience or being taken over by our experience. I guess one thing to normalize is that, here we've created an environment where we are with like-minded people meditating. One of the hardest things that I find as well with myself is that I don't have enough people that I can meditate with. You've done a great job introducing meditation to your children, which is great. That is one of the best gifts that I think you could provide the next generation, the ability to sit with their breath, to breathe, to meditate. But, that is a hard thing, to not have the environment around you, to lose some of the motivation as a result of it. Here we have structure. You know that on Tuesdays at 11:15, you're going to be here to meditate. When you get home, when you start to move through your daily life, you have to find that own little bit of structure. And some days it's going to be there. Some days, responsibilities and life take over. And then naturally, because of all of that, frustration may settle in. You get upset that, you don't have the same quality of meditation that you had. It's going to be different out there than it is here. That was one of the hard truths that I had to realize it's a hard truth that I have to realize each time I go back to my silent meditation retreats. That each year things are going to be different because I am a different person every year. So what I experienced in terms of benefits and obstacles from year one were different in year two, have been different in year three, and they'll probably be different the fourth time I go around. But we have to understand that the practice is not about generating perfection. It's just about returning. It's coming back. Because I go back there every year because I know that there is a really deep value and benefit that I have found from it. But just on a smaller scale, we just sit every time because we return to the practice because we feel the benefit from it, physically, mentally, and emotionally. If anything, I guess our meditation has probably shown us just how many difficulties we have in our life. Physical difficulties, mental difficulties, emotional difficulties. And so if we can understand that, we can also understand that our meditation practice has never been about removing these difficulties. It's been more about changing how we relate to them. One of the things that I've said in the past is that the problem isn't necessarily the problem. It may be, but a part of the problem is how we relate to the problem. And so we may not be able to change the problem itself, but how we relate to the problem is much more within our control. It's much more within our hands. And the goal of this practice, if it is one, isn't necessarily to change that. It's not to change an experience, but to understand it. Because of our past conditions, habits, thought patterns, when we see something, we may not see it with total clarity. So we don't understand it. Or when we see things, we see it through a filter. And when we can remove the filter, these rose-colored glasses or tinted glasses, whatever, we can start to understand the experience with a bit more clarity because we're seeing it for what it is. Not for what we think it to be, or for what we've seen it to be in the past, but for what is directly in front of us in that moment, right there, right then. I think for the most part, that's all I really have to share in terms of the final integration. Do we have any questions that maybe just left outstanding from anything I've said today, last couple of weeks, or just any general questions about meditation as we approach the end of 9 weeks? There may not be, which is fine as well. Nothing may come to mind, which is always fine. Do know that you always have the answer to what you're looking for.
I do have one about breathing. I happen to be reading a novel where one of the characters was trying to calm himself down, and he was pretty sure he was meditating, but it did mention something about how every time he exhaled, he'd do it a second or two longer than his inhales to get rid of more carbon dioxide than he was taking oxygen. So I wondered if that was something I ought to try to do.
So in our, it's a very perfect question. In our system of yoga practices, what you're describing is known as pranayama. It is a breathing technique in which, and it can vary. So I lead a breathing technique which, you start with inhales for 5, exhales for 5. Inhales for 4, exhales for 6. Inhales for 3, exhales for 7. So it creates, one, focusing on counting the breath in that sense is very calming. And 2, it releases a lot of that stagnant energy, carbon dioxide. Reality being, we breathe quite shallow. So we fill up only the upper third of our lungs. Lower 2/3 of our lungs end up just holding on to a lot of stale energy. And so by lengthening breath out, we're releasing that stale energy to make space for new, fresh energy. So we're able to receive richer, more oxygenated air as we release some of that carbon dioxide out. You might do a technique like that before you start your formal meditation. It does differ in the sense that with meditation, we are not controlling our breath in any way. So there is a little blur of that line, is that pranayama, our pranayama techniques, our breathing regulation techniques, they ask us to work skillfully with the breath by, accentuating inhales, accentuating exhales, intentionally holding breath, breathing a bit faster, breathing a bit slower. There's hundreds of breathing techniques. Meditation is asking you to just notice your breath. Your breath as it is in this moment. And so if your breath is a bit shallow, for the sake of your meditation, no issues with that. If the breath is a bit rough at the start, no problem with that. If we can start to notice things and just create the conditions, soft body, calm mind, smooth breath. If we can just create like those 3 conditions, the breath itself will find its own balancing act. And if that means that the natural balanced breath is a soft breath, a relatively shallow breath, for the sake of your meditation, there's no issue with that. But we don't need to have any overt influence on how deep we are breathing or how long we are breathing for our breath. It should just be that as we get calmer and calmer, the breath will naturally take on these qualities that are soft, slow, smooth, and steady. If you're having peaceful sleep, you're not controlling your breath. But if you were to observe someone that's in very deep, peaceful sleep, I would probably gather that there is a soft breath there. You wouldn't be like, as you're sleeping, right? There is a natural slowness to the breath, a natural softness to the breath. Unless you're going through a nightmare, probably a smooth and steady breath as well. And so it's almost that kind of quality of our breathing, like the breath that you have first thing in the morning as you wake up from a good night's sleep. And in that sense, you don't have to tell yourself how to breathe or breathe any longer or deeper. It's just a nice, steady paced breath. So I hope that helped. So if there is just one way to complement what you've said, breathing techniques can help calm down the mind, center the mind. It is no different than like you going for a nice walk to ground down in the body. And then from that calm, nice walk, you can sit to meditate. So you've gotten rid of some of the restless energy that you're holding in your body. And then in having done either, like a mindful walk, or in having, centered your mind a bit more with intentional, regulated breathing, you then let go of all of that control to just be with breath. Does that help?
Yes.
Cool.
Quick question. Is it possible to meditate by walking?
Yes, there is a walking meditation. There is a form of meditation that is walking, because there are 4 postures of meditation. Lying down, seated, standing, moving. Moving can be walking. Moving can be a yoga practice. It looks different. If you join next session, I will offer that, and I have offered it in the past. Walking meditation, whereas with seated meditation, my anchor is my breath. For a walking meditation, my anchor is to the direct sensation of my foot walking on earth. So I would prefer, you could do it indoors. You could do it outside. You could do it with shoes, but my request would be to do it without shoes. But it would be to feel the whole mindful experience of taking a step, one step at a time, to feel the lifting of your foot, to feel the moving of your foot, to feel the landing of your foot, and then to feel the weight shift into your other leg as it lifts, moves, and lands. That is a very high level of it. It is an experience that is done. Walking meditation is a thing. There is just a slight difference. I like to differentiate between a walking meditation and a mindful walk. Mindful walking is just, you being present in the experience of all that is around you as you walk. Nothing wrong with that. That's great. It centers us, it grounds us, it connects us. Walking meditation is less about connecting to the world around you and more about connecting to the experience within you as you walk, as you take one step. I can't talk too much more about it because I would have to demonstrate it and it would take on its own thing. But yes, you can walk. There is a way to do it. My hope is that if you join in one of the future sessions, I can show you. There you go. Yeah. Question?
Sometimes I do a guided meditation and they'll say, repeat this mantra silently to yourself. But I find that almost distracting to have to remember to repeat the mantra and then remember what the meaning is of the mantra. So,
I don't explicitly work with mantras. They are powerful tools that people use. Like in terms of loving kindness, the simple mantra is, I am loving kindness. I am loving awareness is what I would rather say. Mantras have their time and place. They are, once again, a tool that can be used. When we focus all of our energy, not just on saying the word, but feeling the essence of the word. So it'd be like, it's one thing to be like, I am kind, I am kind, I am loving, I'm kind. There's no energy with that, right? I'm just reciting nonsense at that point. But if I can be present with myself, and the tonality of how I would say it would probably change, but if I can feel what it is like to be loving, kind, compassionate, if I can embody those qualities, then, or I am calm, I am grounded, I am present. They can help. They can help. For some of us, we have a tough time working with mantras because we've never been kind to ourselves. So just having positive affirmations said back to you is just a very foreign concept. For some people, it works very well. But affirmations without action are simply delusion. That's what I say. You need to have the emphasis behind having the energy in that affirmation. So if you do nothing with it, if I'm just saying the word but I don't feel it in any way, it's weightless, it's hollow. But it is a tool that can once again be used to cultivate a quality within you that you're maybe trying to strengthen, or that you're just trying to cultivate, I guess is the right word. So they serve a purpose. I don't use them. There's every possibility to generate that loving kindness and compassion and calmness and groundedness by just being with breath. That is what I can say. But it's, once again, another one of these training wheels that we have that are at our disposal in our toolbox if it provides us with value. So no different than a breathing technique to calm the mind, to regulate the mind. No different than nice soft music to ground ourselves down. No different than a nice candle that gets lit. All of these things create an environment. Not just the external environment in some cases, but also the internal environment that we're working with that allows our meditation to be that much more meditative. You know, it creates the conditions for your meditation to arise because you've created a mindful environment around you. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, sometimes there are words like sat, chit, ananda, and I don't know what those words mean, so I have to like try and translate it in my head, and that's what I found.
Yeah, what is Satchit Ananda? I am love, Ananda. I am peace. I am consciousness. Yeah.
Is that Deepak Chopra?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done these ones.
Yeah.
There's different mantras. They follow different Sanskrit sayings and all that kind of stuff. They are all there. I'm sorry, we didn't do a guided meditation or anything today. So that is your homework. That is your homework. You're going to find a 10-minute window, hopefully today, hopefully every single day. If it drips down to 5, it extends up to 15, who knows? Like, that's great. But my hope is that this really ties together everything that we've been trying to build and learn over the last 8 weeks. And just know that the resources are always there, right? So if you feel that you're losing some of your stability with your meditation practice, just go watch one of the videos that we've done. We've gone through all the practices together. I've taken out just the guided meditation component of it as well. It's not as formal of a video because it just is the splicing of this is where we started the meditation, and so the meditation drifts right in. You have apps that you can use. You don't need them because we've worked without them. All we are working with is breath, but these tools are there. And as always, I'm a resource, so if you ever have a question, please let me know. Thank you all for joining for the last 9 weeks. It's been a pleasure. I hope you were able to gain something, to learn something, and I hope you were able to see the value to keep this practice going for yourselves. Cool. Thank you all.